Good morning. My name is Frank Segall. I'm the chairman of the Business and Law Cannabis Advisory Group at Burns & Levinson. I'm also the chairman of our business finance group, and I'm here today with my partners, Scott Mosco, who co-chairs the Cannabis group with me, my partner, Joe Volman, who co-chairs the business law group, and we welcome you. Not all doom and gloom, but I think that kind of sums up a lot of what's been going on in the industry today. And we certainly appreciate you coming here today. We're going to dive into a lot of issues that are facing us in the state of the cannabis industry. We have some great panelists today, a lot of topics to dive into. And what I'd like to do is talk to you about how Burns & Levinson got here and why we do this conference. And then we'll get started. So we are not neophytes to the industry. Many of you in this room are pioneers. We don't consider ourselves pioneers, maybe trailblazers, but we got into this space around 2012. We saw a unique opportunity to be part of a nascent industry that was providing services and products that really could help people. And yes, a lot of people are motivated by profit, but it is an amazing drug, and cannabis has incredible properties to it. And we saw this, like many of you in this room, as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So we decided to get into the space, dive head first, and we were the first major Boston law firm to launch a dedicated practice group back in 2012, 2013, and we were one of the first major corporate law firms in the country to do so. We weren't afraid of the issues. We had analyzed the issues. We had clients who were coming to us, and we said, we want to be the go-to corporate law firm in the space. And as a premier middle market law firm in the country, we brought those skills that are needed to help you grow your companies, whether it's private equity, tax, venture capital, lending, ERISA, environmental. That's what Burns & Levinson brings to the table for its corporate clients and for its cannabis clients. And these are the skill sets that one needs to be in this industry. We take you from startup, we help you with your regulatory, we provide the operational experience. We introduce you to our resources, our capital providers, our lenders, our private equity sources. And our goal was to become the go-to corporate law firm, and we feel that we are well on our way to being that. It's nice to get accolades from your peers. Scott and I, were designated on the first National Law Journal list as two of the trailblazing attorneys in the country. That's great. But what's more satisfying is being able to build a national practice with the support of clients. And that's what we've been able to do. Our reach truly is national. We are headquartered in Boston. We have 125 attorneys. We have over 15 dedicated attorneys to the cannabis practice. Not many law firms can say that. It's funny when we hear that firms say, oh, we have 70 people in cannabis. Well, we know that's not true. They're not touching it like we are. We're directly in it, and we're dedicated to the space, and we've been able to build out a national practice, and we're doing deals in all of these states that you're seeing here. But more importantly, what enables us to do that is we have built up a best-in-class client base. And many of you in the room, and we're greatly appreciative of your being here today and supporting our practice throughout the United States. And one of the things that we decided to do is we didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves in just representing operators, cultivators, retailers. We wanted to provide the resources that were necessary for them, so we wanted to build a client base that we can connect people to, and we're all about connectivity. It's a very important thing that we do at Burns & Levinson. So we've been able to build a roster that includes not only dozens of operators nationwide, from local players to regional to MSOs, but we have lending clients like Landrace, who is with us today. We have venture capital clients like Entourage Capital that's with us today. And we're also very much at the forefront of working with and representing Safe Harbor and Katrina Skinner with respect to helping banks get compliant and helping clients get bank accounts, which is a big problem we're going to talk about as well. So we've been able to build this amazing roster of clients, and we continue to do so. And to the extent we're not working with you, well, we certainly hope we have the opportunity to do so. So why this forum? why this conference. This is our third annual conference. And the reason is that, there's so many conferences going. You go to 10 of these a day, literally. It's crazy how this has proliferated. But we wanted to bring a best-in-class conference, not just to the Boston area, but to our clients nationwide and to people who are interested in this space. And we're all about the CCC, and I don't mean the Cannabis Control Commission. I mean coming together, collaborating, and connecting people. That's what we're about, and that's what one of our goals is today, is that you will hear from industry leaders, you'll learn from them, but more importantly, you'll connect with the people in this room, because that's how opportunities are created, a new business is founded, and that's in our DNA, and that's what Scott, Joe, and I teach our team, and we really go out and we try to do that, and our keynote speakers will be an example of that today as well. We would not be here today without our panelists. You'll see in the agenda, you'll meet them. These are top industry people, from operators to consultants to bankers, and they will provide their insight, their vision, their trials, their tribulations, and we're very excited about being able to assemble such a group of industry leaders, and it's a testament that I'm happy about to this conference as each year as we continue to grow and continue to have people reaching out to us saying they want to participate. So we'll be very excited to have you meet with them, and we want you to connect with our panelists throughout the day as well, and they're here to meet with you and talk to you. We also are very thrilled to have as our keynote speakers at lunch Dr. Karen Munz-Casey, who is the founder and CEO of Garden Remedies, a true pioneer in this industry, a huge advocate who helped bring legalization to Massachusetts, along with Dan Fireman, who is the founder of Fireman Capital Partners, one of the leading private equity firms in the country that has made a move into cannabis, and they are collaborating together. I'm proud to say that we had a big part in introducing them and making that partnership a reality, and it's going to be very exciting to hear their individual and collective stories. And also we have the privilege of having the Commissioner, Steve Hoffman, join us. If you were here last year, you saw that we did a one-on-one interview, and we're going to do that again this year. And Steve is very candid, very open, and he's kind enough to grace us with that opportunity again today. In addition, today would not be possible without our key sponsors. We have terrific relationships. We have the privilege of representing Kushco, which is truly one of the leading ancillary suppliers of products and services in the cannabis space. They're here with us today. They'll be one of our panelists. And Cohn-Resnick. Cohn-Resnick truly was one of the first full-service international, national accounting firms to get into the cannabis space. They've led the way. They are my go-to firm when clients are asking me who should I be speaking with. And they've been very helpful with our clients, and they're handling a lot of transactions, a lot of M&A and diligence, and they'll be sharing some of their insight. Greg Chin, who's will be on one of our panels later on. Also, our sponsors, we're thrilled to have Air Beerless with us. They are truly one of the go-to firms, if not the go-to firm in Canada, and the law firm. They have been involved in a number of RTOs, IPOs, private placements, and we have a collaborative effort with them when we're doing cross-border transactions. And also with us is Hub International, who you'll hear from today on the panel about what's going on in the insurance space, particularly D&O, private property insurance, creative policies that are coming out in the M&A space that they're at the forefront of. Our other sponsors are Amplified. Amplified has also been leading the charge and been in the insurance space and consulting for a number of years in cannabis. And we're also thrilled to have with us a good friend and client, Nucleus One, Jacques Santucci's group, who are very active in helping new and existing companies in this space navigate on a consulting basis, launch their platforms, and we've done a fair amount of collaborative efforts with Nucleus One. In addition, we will be featuring, as we do every year, Scott Greiper at Viridian Capital. Hopefully his plane will not be delayed by this weather. I know a lot of you had trouble getting here this morning, and there's still a lot of people who are on their way. Verdian will give us their insights. They have this amazing deal tracker that tracks most of the transactions that are going on. And Scott will be moderating a panel of venture capital, debt, and high net worth capital sources. So we've got a terrific day. I also want to also thank my staff, Kristen Weller, head of our marketing, Christina Madden, and Sophia Allard, who have helped put this on, and wouldn't be possible without that. And I appreciate all their efforts in that regard. So why this cannabis platform? As I said, we want you to follow those three C's. You've come together. We want you to connect, and we hope that leads to collaboration. So on behalf of Scott Moskal and myself, who you'll fortunately or unfortunately see a lot of moderating today, we're your master of ceremonies, but it's not about us, it's about the panelists. We welcome you. We appreciate your time that you're taking to be here, because we know you have a lot of options in doing so. And we encourage you, as I said, to connect, come see us, our team who's here throughout the day. And if we're not working with you, we certainly hope we have the opportunity and privilege to do so. So welcome. I want to ask our first panel if they could come up to the stage. Good morning. So we're going to kick this off talking about the state of the cannabis industry. And with us, we have 4 leaders in that various parts of the industry. We have MSOs and we have consultants as well. And with us is Katrina Skinner. Katrina is the president and general counsel of Safe Harbor. Safe Harbor truly is the leading consulting firm in the space with respect to advising banks, credit unions, companies on navigating the FDIC and the other banking regulations throughout the country as to how to bank cannabis and how to lend in the space. Also with us is Jason Miller, who's the Vice President of M&A and Capital Markets at iAnthus. iAnthus was one of the first MSOs to be in the space, one of the first to go public, and multi-state operator and truly leading the charge. In addition, we have Greg Huffaker, who is with us from Canna Advisors, who is the Director of Client Relations. Canna Advisors has done everything from operation to consulting. They were one of the first operators back in the day in Colorado, and now they work with companies in every state on the licensing front. They have a tremendous success record in helping people file and navigate the application system. And then rounding us out is Sam Tracet, who is the Director of Government Relations with Forefront Ventures. Forefront started as a consulting firm and now has become one of the leading MSOs in the space. Good morning and welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. We know that cannabis is a global phenomenon, and there's no stop to it. There are obstacles, there are roadblocks, but the United States is certainly taking the lead. And we have 33 states today medical, 11 recreational, 26 have been decriminalized, and the pace certainly has been picking up, particularly in 2019. So we're going to want to address national issues, local issues, operational. We're going to talk about a little bit about capital, CBD, hemp. We have other panels that are going to dive into that, so we're not going to spend too much time. And we certainly want to talk about the future and what that means and what this panel is thinking about. So in 2019, we certainly have seen some advancements. We've seen the Safe Banking Act passed by the House, but it's stalled in the Senate. We've seen the McClintock Amendment, and for those of you who aren't familiar with that, the medical licensed dispensaries and operations are protected under the Rushabar Amendment in the tax bill that says the federal government cannot spend a dollar prosecuting or pursuing those licensed facilities. It does not cover rec, and the McClintock Amendment would extend that protection to rec. In addition, we've seen advances, more states coming on board. We've seen Illinois with legislative approval. And we have a lot of major states still in the queue and obstacles. There's been a big capital crunch, which Scott will talk about and which we'll talk about in our last panel as well. And it has been, as that video showed, a bit of a roller coaster. But why don't we start it off hearing from our panel. And Jason, maybe you can tell us a little bit about iAnthus operations, but what has been the biggest struggles now that you're getting to a certain size in 2019 on the national level, some of your biggest concerns as you continue to try to grow and expand your platform?
Sure. So iAnthus has operations in 11 states, 9 of which are currently producing revenue. As you mentioned, we were the first public multi-state operator. What we've found is, I know you said challenges, but I think on the plus side, there's definitely good growth and demand, and we're seeing customers continue to show up. I think in the face of a market right now that has seen a lot of declines, as your video opening this up showed recently. So I think where you see certain challenges happening these days are the public market perception versus the reality of the fundamentals of the industry, and capital raising is tight and highly scrutinized by investors, and there are smaller players who are struggling a little bit to get that capital these days. Secondly is making sure that you're building a business that is sustainable and cohesive across your states. We've grown a lot through acquisition, through new license wins, and every state is sort of at a different stage in its development. Different states have different brand names, different products, and working to harmonize that is one important factor. So, for example, iAnthus has launched a retail brand called B, which is being rolled out across all of our states to bring the platform together on the retail side. We have different products such as MPX concentrates, which we have available in multiple states, and we'll be rolling out to our other states. And I think building that out so it's a platform that is sustainable and cohesive is important.
And we're going to talk about branding, and particularly talk about B a little later. But with respect to, and we'll get into the Banking Act, et cetera, I mean, what kind of issues are you finding nationally, other than your stock price and capital, that are becoming most challenging as you continue to try to expand your base?
I think every market is different. So you think about it, I think, on a state-by-state basis versus a national basis. But I think you see in various markets, the state level versus the municipality level definitely has different regulations, different approval processes, and different timelines. So even a state like California, which is the biggest market in the country, a vast number of the markets within that state don't allow cannabis products. Or in here locally in Massachusetts, for example, the approval processes are not aligned. So we've gotten city approval in Worcester to open our adult use store, and now we're working through the state process. And some of it is just a timing issue to work through those processes. And you work through it, and it'll get there. I think it's just kind of the timelines versus expectations sometimes take longer in this sector.
Sam, what are you experiencing as you continue to grow, and maybe just a little brief background, more meat on the bone on Forefront?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, as you mentioned, Forefront started as a consulting firm, but now we're a multi-state operator. I think our most recent count is licenses in 9 states. Historically, we were much more focused on the retail side of things, but in the past few years, we've been getting into the cultivation and processing as well. Actually just merged with a company called Canna, based in Washington State. And that's one of the biggest growers and processors out there. So we've really been able to have a lot of good synergy there. But we are definitely running into challenges just like everybody. And since we did start off as a consulting firm, we do have a really wide view of the industry. And I'd say the challenges are kind of falling into 2 major buckets of both the business side and then on the political government side. On the business side, it is definitely true that just obtaining a license is not the same thing as successfully opening and operating with that license an actual good business. Our CEO likes to talk about the analogy of, are you playing Risk or are you playing Monopoly? In the early days, everyone was just playing Monopoly. Every time you get a chance to buy a license, pick it up because in the long run, it'll help you somehow. Sometimes that strategy works, but then sometimes you end up with one of each color and it's not really working out, and someone else ends up winning the game. Instead, we like to think about it like Risk, being a lot more strategic, only making acquisitions and mergers when it does make sense rather than just doing everything that you can, and being a little bit more picky about what you pursue. But then on the government side too, we are running into a lot of issues. I personally came to this from the activism world. I was involved in a lot of the nonprofits that were passing these legalization bills before there was an industry. And right now the biggest challenge is just that we're running out of states that have ballot initiatives. We've basically passed medical marijuana in almost every state that has ballot initiative processes. In adult use, we're getting close to there as well. And so we're turning to the legislatures, which is just a completely different fight than trying to pass a ballot initiative where you're talking to the public, where everyone supports you. We do still have some initiatives that will be voted on next year, which I'd be excited to talk about a bit later, but it is shifting the battlegrounds over to the legislatures, and they're much more hesitant to change than people just voting yes or no on the ballot.
When we talk about battlegrounds, maybe you can talk about the new issues that keep coming up, like the vape issue and the bans in Massachusetts and other states looking to potentially follow suit. How is iAnthus and Forefront dealing with those kind of issues?
Yeah, I mean, for Forefront at least, it is unfortunate to see the vaping issue getting timed so poorly with a lot of these battles. I mean, just recently, the governors of Connecticut, where I'm from originally, New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey all got together to have this big regional summit on legalization, and they announced it pretty much before the vaping stuff really blew up, but it ended up being one of the dominant parts of that meeting. So, I mean, it was great. It was a historic meeting for governors talking about how to legalize, not whether to legalize, but the vaping crisis was still kind of hanging over that, unfortunately. And for us, it really is just because we do work nationally, being able to teach state regulators from what others are doing. In Pennsylvania, for example, the Department of Health there that regulates the medical program put out a fantastic statement, actually emphatically saying, we regulate the medical marijuana industry here. We trust their products. Don't buy on the black market, buy from licensed stores, which is just 180 degrees different than what happened here in Massachusetts with the ban. And so being able to educate policymakers in other states to try to get them to follow more Pennsylvania's model than Massachusetts' model, and taken from other areas as well, I think is really helpful.
Jason, what about on your front?
As it relates to vape, I think a lot of it comes down to patient and customer education. So understanding that what's actually in the products are some of these additives that are likely a cause of the issues actually in your product, making sure that you are having proper testing, proper suppliers, and the like are all very important factors in that, and making sure that your product is clean and trusted and not the cause of these issues.
Well, and later on, when the commissioner here, we're going to talk about his view on what's happening in Massachusetts. But obviously, everyone's concern is that these things domino and other states start picking it up. Let's talk about the other big issue that's always been out there. And Katrina, I'm going to turn to you, is the Safe Banking Act. Safe Harbor truly is at the forefront of advising banks with respect to their compliance, their procedures. And I know you're smack in the middle of this, and you've been very involved down in D.C. So maybe you can give us your take on where you see this headed, and also how you're finding states are adopting or being open to just not waiting for the Safe Bank Act to pass, but dealing with it at a state level.
Okay. Well, like everybody, I have my own ideas, but I don't have that crystal ball on what's going to happen with the Senate or the Safe Banking Act. But I was in D.C. with Sunday Seafried, who created the Safe Harbor Banking Program, and that's what we do is license it throughout the country to financial institutions. We work with FDIC-regulated, OCC, and NCUA-regulated institutions. So we've seen it from all the different regulatory agencies' perspectives. Everybody's looking for the guidance that the Safe Banking Act would provide, because the Financial Examiner Council will have to establish criteria for financial institutions, and that would make our lives a lot easier, because right now we have the 2014 FinCEN guidance, and that's about it, as well as the Cole Memo priorities that we have to bank to. So the Safe Banking Act is not supposed to change those. It's just supposed to either, we'd have to continue to bank to those guidelines, and it would establish exam criteria, which would help us in that examiners would have a consistent set of guidelines for banks to follow, as well as remove us financial institutions who bank cannabis from the definition of money launderers. And that's often one of our biggest roadblocks for boards and executive teams. They don't like the threat of prosecution for actually banking cannabis, even if it's in a compliant way. What we've heard from the Senate, we work very closely through this group, Public Health and Safety. It's a 501c4 advocacy group that has aligned with the attorneys general. And we are working with Senator Crapo right now, and he is actually more interested in the bill than I think the press gives him credit for right now. But he wants to bring in more rules and change some of the FinCEN guidelines. His primary concern right now is legacy funds, but our position is legacy funds have always been around, and they're still subject to regular BSA and AML regulations. So it'll be interesting to see, but some of the other insiders that I've spoken with have said we have a Republican problem, is that there's just a handful of senators that just do not want to look like they're at all supporting the cannabis industry. And one of those is Senator McConnell. We met with his staff, and although he's a proponent of hemp and is working with FinCEN to create some hemp banking guidelines.
And he has an interest in some hemp
Yes,
operations. Yes,
that's what they said, but he does not want to appear at all that he is supporting the cannabis industry or the legalization, so he was not going to be supportive of the Safe Banking Act.
How is Forefront confronted its issues with, I mean, you're national now, you seem to be banking. I'm curious as to iAnthus and Forefront, if that's still an issue for the large MSOs. And then, Greg, maybe you can talk about your clients who are local, more local, and if that's inhibiting their ability to even get applications or open up their businesses. So maybe Sam.
Yeah, sure. And so luckily, banking is not an issue for us personally anymore. In the past, we have had some of our operations that did have to run cash only for a limited amount of time, and that's always both such a huge operational issue and a safety concern. So we have been there in the past, and we understand that many other businesses are still in that spot. So we have been advocating pretty strongly for the Safe Banking Act, just because we do think, of course, it's not a cure-all. There's many, many more reforms that we need to do afterwards, but it's an issue that the National Cannabis Industry Association that we're heavily involved in has been pushing for a long time. And if we could get Congress to pass anything in favor of marijuana, I see that as a huge victory. And so I think that that has been our biggest priority so far.
Yeah, and so Canna Advisors, A to Z consulting firm, but we are always doing competitive license applications, which means we're always working in emerging markets. And in emerging markets, it means people are basically paying the fee to us first, and the first question is often around banking. And as you're seeing social equity come in more and more, which is allowing more access to people at lower levels with less capital, that's a more immediate problem. Because you don't have the large amount of cash to float, you immediately want some access to banking services. And in every state, it sort of starts over again with trying to do the education around banks, with helping our clients talk about how to talk to bankers, how to get them involved and interested, the incentives that a bank can have. And the Safe Banking Act is starting to bring a little more visibility to it, but we still regularly deal with clients who lose bank accounts mid-process. And for folks that had banking relationships for decades, One client comes to mind who was a farmer, and when his bank found out about it, he said, "We're calling all your loans," which, if anyone knows a farmer, can be devastating. And they said, you better get out of it, or we're going to call all these. He said, "How much is it?" $5 million. He said, "Fine, I'll pay it today." He had the ability to do that. Most farmers don't. So it's a huge amount of education and a big burden on new players in the industry to have to try to teach a banker that this is okay to do.
And I'm assuming that iAnthus, because you've expanded so far, that the banking is less of an issue for you guys?
Correct. In some of the early days, there were banks that dropped our accounts and we'd had to find new ones. But I think now, whether it's through Safe Harbor or otherwise, there are a core number of banks that are willing to work with the industry and with us. And there have been times where there's a long line to open a new account because the number of institutions are limited, but we've been able to open those accounts. But I think one of the other benefits, as you just mentioned, with more banks participating, larger banks participating, the ability to borrow capital, I think, will be a big help through the Safe Banking Act.
So, Greg, you mentioned something that kind of jumped ahead, but it's a good segue back for me to bring it into the discussion, is social equity and economic empowerment for everyone on this panel. Very hot topic. A lot of things are happening, particularly in Massachusetts. We're seeing, the commission promulgating, I don't want to say special care, but special regs that are giving, exclusivity to these candidates for social consumption clubs, for delivery. City of Cambridge certainly is smacking the news with revolutionary clinics, where they, in Revolutionary's opinion, are not following the law and are giving, again, exclusivity to these candidates at the expense of existing dispensaries, saying they cannot open for recreational for 2 years, and then changing the playing field, saying after those 2 years, it's only going to be diverse clients or social equity. How does this panel feel about that? Is it changing the playing field? Is it working at all? A lot of people feel it's not working because of the requirements that you have to own a majority control, and a lot of investors do not want to back somebody who may not have the experience, or they have, they don't have the control rights or even veto rights or minority protection rights. Sam, I'm going to start with you. I mean, how do you feel about these programs? Are they working? Are they a failure? Are they changing the playing field for existing operators like yourself?
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a loaded question, but
yeah. I think it probably is too early to tell whether these programs have been a success, just because, especially with delivery, a lot of these are things that still need to get up and running. But if you look at the makeup of who owns licenses right now, I think we absolutely can't declare victory. I think it's still overwhelmingly white, and so there is still a lot that has to be done there. But I do really like the sort of model that Massachusetts has been taking with the delivery services, just because some of the problems that we see in these other states is that even if you're trying to create these programs that give certain advantages to folks to get licenses, raising capital is still one of the biggest issues there. And it ties back into banking, as we were talking about, that if you can't get a small business loan and you don't already have millions in the bank, you still can't access one of those licenses. So I think that safe banking actually will be a really huge help there, that if we can get small business loans into the cannabis industry, that will be one of the biggest changes. But particularly for delivery services, I think that's a pretty cool idea, just because those licenses are kind of inherently a lower barrier to entry than starting up a big grow facility or a brick and mortar store. And so because of that, I think that program will probably be a lot more effective than we've seen in other states, where it's geared more towards these areas where you still need millions of dollars in order to get into it.
Greg?
Yeah, to give everyone a short, quick history, if I can, of some social equity programs that have been successful or not. Ohio tried to do it around race. It was ruled unconstitutional. The city of Oakland did a short-term program that is widely seen as pretty successful, where for every license given to a non-diverse applicant, there had to be one given to a diverse applicant. We're seeing in Massachusetts some good success around waiving licensing fees, and some maybe not some good successes at more of the local level. Illinois is taking a multi-pronged approach here where they're allowing, it's 20% of the points in the competitive license application, which means pretty much every license is probably going to go to a social equity applicant, because otherwise you're playing with an at best B-. And how you get there is not based around race, but if you or a family member got arrested for possession at some point, or if you spent 5 of the last 10 years living in a disproportionately affected area, which they basically used a lot of metrics around poverty, food stamps, unusually high rates of arrest to set those things. And they're also in Illinois doing a grant program and low interest rate financing. It's going to be interesting to see if it works or not, because if you probably the gears are turning in your head about, well, there's a lot of people who aren't really social equity people that are going to be getting a leg up around that criteria. So it's going to be interesting to see if the numbers bear out that this is increasing access or just giving people who would have gotten the licenses otherwise a leg up on the state's dime. So certainly no one's figured it out yet, in my opinion.
Jason, what is iAnthus' take on this? And, as you guys are sitting here, and if you were in Cambridge, for example, and you were open like Revolutionary, would you have the same attitude where they're saying, you know what, we're going to bar you from the marketplace for recreational for 2 years, and then after that we're going to limit licenses going forward just to social equity, economic empowerment?
That's not an area where I personally spend a lot of my time, but I think, of course there'd be some frustrations on things where you have a license that you think you might be ready to open and then have delays or things you need to work around. But I think ultimately, we think it's an important program. It's important to have everyone involved in this industry. And I think as you think about long-term, especially for those who are in the cultivation business and in the processing business and developing products, having more outlets on the retail side to sell your product is a good thing. And I think, being able to support people who have been impacted in certain ways in this industry and be able to help their businesses grow is something that we would like to participate in.
And I don't disagree, that's a politically correct statement, and an admirable one, but what a lot of people are concerned about is that you see what's happening in Cambridge, and Greg, I'm wondering if you're seeing this because you do licenses all over the country. Is that going to entitle or empower these towns and cities or even states to change the rules midstream? And what we're finding is, personally, I don't see social equity empowerment working in Massachusetts. Just look at the number of operators. It's got to be fixed. There's got to be a better way. And we're going to talk to the commissioner about that, see what his thoughts are. Are you seeing a swing, or is Cambridge, the state of Cambridge in and of itself, are you seeing that trend maybe perhaps happening elsewhere?
It's a particularly extreme that I'm seeing of barring access. And I think, as you saw in Ohio and them going too far, if you really try to push this stuff through, the courts are going to, wake up a little bit more. I think you need to, the idea in social equity is trying to level the playing field, not just only allow half of the field to play. And a court's going to, in most cases, feel that way.
Well, let's move on to operational issues that you're seeing on a national basis. For example, where do you see cultivation going? Are we headed to an oversupply like Canada is? Are you, particular operations, are you focused more on the retail? Are you scaling back on cultivation? I'd like to hear, Sam, what Forefront is doing in that.
Yeah, I mean, we're still going full speed ahead on both cultivation and the retail side of things. As I mentioned before, we just merged with Canna, who runs Northwest Cannabis Solutions out in Washington State. And they've got, I think it's something like 5 of the top 10 edibles products out there, and are a really big player on the West Coast. But right now we're working on bringing that over to the East Coast. We just launched one of their brands here in Massachusetts, Pebbles edible products. And so I think that that's one really big part of it right now is just taking all of our knowledge and actually implementing it across all of our different states, because each one of those is at a different situation there. But one thing, especially on the government and policy side, that I think is going to be a huge issue specifically for cultivation in the coming years is interstate commerce. If federal legalization happens, basically immediately interstate commerce is allowed because states are explicitly forbidden from closing down their borders to products from other states. And so because of that, we're going to have, I think, a really big shakeup in the cultivation space just because there's certain states where it doesn't really make all that much sense to be growing cannabis. Historically, back in the black market days when there were no effective borders because it was all illegal, you weren't growing cannabis in North Dakota. There's a reason that Oregon and California were supplying most of the country. And so once interstate commerce comes down and we're able to have kind of those national sources of product, I think it will really hurt cultivators in certain states. Will be amazing for cultivators in Oregon. That's why they're the main ones pushing it right now, because they have oversupply issues and want to supply the rest of the country. But for retailers, it probably will be really positive. If you're not involved on the cultivation side, it means prices will come down and you'll be able to pass that on to consumers. So it's anyone's guess as to when this is going to happen. It could happen through any kind of federal memo in the similar style of the Cole memo. And then these states are doing interstate agreements. Oregon has already passed this at the state level, and they're talking about doing it with, say, California or Nevada or another state that they border. But if we get a real comprehensive solution through Congress, it could certainly be part of that with any sort of descheduling or other legalization efforts like the MORE Act. And so that's, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years is going to be a really huge issue. Probably don't have to worry about it for a few years, but that will be a huge change in the industry.
Well, and Oregon has that oversupply, and is iAnthus, concerned about that as well? Are you guys still pushing forward on cultivation or scaling back?
Well, I agree with what Sam said. It's unnatural to have some of these cultivation facilities in some of the places they are, whether it's in a warehouse in certain states or there's places where they don't have the right environment. But in the near term, we think it's important to continue to expand out cultivation. There's certainly not oversupply in most of the eastern states and most of the limited license markets right now. There's a lot of demand. In Massachusetts, we're doubling our space. In Florida, we're planning to triple our capacity. There's plenty of need and demand for product, and that oversupply issue is only specific to a couple of states and more in Canada issue.
Greg, what are you seeing on the application side? Are you seeing more on the retail or cultivation? What do you see as the primary interest of people trying to get into the industry from your perspective?
I'd say over time we're seeing a lot more interest in retail. I think the people who were really into cultivation grabbed those licenses. We're also seeing less licenses going out to cultivation than we used to. And unfortunately, some states are also not learning the lessons of past states where, like in Illinois, they're still giving out retail first. Those stores are going to be open before the supply really catches up on the adult use side. They'll be able to get some from the medical cultivation facilities, but Illinois already has a supply problem because it's all being grown, again, in warehouses, and it is not ideal. There's a real pinch across the country of experienced growers with excellent hard science background that are already getting caught up by MSOs and folks like that. So it's harder for new groups to really be producing at effective profit margins.
And what are you seeing with respect to operations on the grow side? I mean, indoor seems to be down, greenhouses are up. A lot of that has to do, obviously, with climate. But what are you seeing with respect to any new technological advances or processes that you feel free you can share with the audience or people who are looking to get into that side of things?
Yeah, the automation has really been improving massively. LED technology is coming around very quickly. 2 years ago, I would have said stay away from it. Now it seems almost crazy not to. In terms of automation, rolling benches, excellent fertigation systems, doing a lot more CapEx up front to save huge labor costs down the line, and it makes for a much more effective exit someday when you can turn over a facility without also turning over all of the woes of, trimmer training and job loss and those kind of issues. So at first, that kind of technology was very expensive. Vertical growing was almost a non-starter. Now it's coming closer to becoming a standardized thing with multiple competitors in the market that all offer, excellent choices.
Sam, what is Forefront doing in that respect with respect to changing its operations or adding new technology?
Yeah, it really is all about automation. That's something that the folks at CanX were really good at, and that's part of why we went with that partnership. It's just fantastic to see at their facility of all of the automated, cartridge fillers and other machinery that you can get, all of the capital expenditures that make you able to operate so much more efficiently. And so we're in the process of implementing those same sort of solutions in our operations in other states. But I think that is really one of the biggest ones, especially as the industry gets more competitive. In the early days, especially when folks are still getting open, it's a whole lot easier to sell your product if there's not that many options. But in a mature market, they're in Washington State, which tied with Colorado as passing in 2012. People often forget about them, but they did tie for first. So they've been doing this for a long time, and that's the only way they've been able to survive and thrive in that market. And so I feel Massachusetts is catching up there, and a lot of the East Coast is now starting to get to the point where that sort of differentiator is going to make a huge difference compared to the early days when you could just open up your doors and you'd have a lineup out the door just because there weren't that many other folks out there yet.
Anything on your front, Jason, that's new or cutting edge that you guys are doing that's different?
No, I think it's all pretty aligned. The one thing we've also found we've been able to do in Florida is grow in a shade house. So it's sort of a hybrid indoor-outdoor, but it's a lot cheaper to build that out, and you could grow faster.
So let's talk about branding, which you mentioned, Jason. Everyone talks about, well, there's no national brand. Maybe when the walls come down, that will make things easier. But you made a big shift. iAnthus made a big shift to the B line. Love to share that story with the audience. And does that mean that you're really looking at it as having just your own brand, or are you still carrying other brands? And where do you feel the opportunity is for new operators coming into the space?
Sure. The B brand is a retail brand, so that's what all the stores will be called, but it's not necessarily a product brand. In this industry, there's limited ability to do marketing. There's no real advertising, right? How are you getting your name in front of people? It's their experience in the stores. So that's sort of important to us. So when they think about it and say, well, I had a good experience at a B store, I'll keep going back there. And then ultimately, as they have the ability to order online, they're remembering that that's the experience, and that's where I was well educated, and that's where I got really good products. So we're differentiating a store brand versus a product brand. We think it's important within the stores to carry multiple products, not just your own. And of course, different states have different limitations on that. In Florida, for example, you're only allowed to carry what you grow and process yourselves right now, so there's not a wholesale market. But places where there is a wholesale market, we think it's important, again, for those customers to come in and not just say, oh, I only have access to a house brand. I have access to a wide variety of brands and products within that. So we've also hired a new chief marketing officer earlier this year to help develop the retail brands, because we do believe that's important over time, especially as deregulation happens and there's ability to send your products across the country, potentially get it at more regular retailers thinking farther down the line, more regular way online retailers. Building your products are kind of a multi-stage process, starting with the store and then going to the products themselves.
Sam, how important do you see the branding at this stage, and what is Forefront doing in that regard?
Yeah, it is one of our big focuses right now. Our retail brand is called Mission, and so we have Mission stores in multiple states. But it is interesting just because, because of the different state markets, interstate brands and national brands, I think it's really preparing for a national market, but right now it doesn't matter that much, at least on the medical side, just because so few states have reciprocity that an out-of-state patient can't necessarily buy in Massachusetts. I do know up in Maine, where I currently live, they do have reciprocity, and so Massachusetts patients can come up. And so in that sort of narrow circumstance, having some sort of consistency is helpful, but it's really for the adult use market where that matters a lot more when anyone over 21 can go to your store. So if you're on vacation in California or Oregon, you might want to have a familiar brand out there since you aren't supposed to fly with it. So you can go purchase it even if it's something that you really like back home so that you can actually get it locally. So I think that's really what all of the national branding is all about, is preparing for that market and for more states to allow reciprocity. I think that is important. More medical states coming online, I hope that does become more of a trend, but the adult use market, I think, is much more important on that front.
And how much of your focus as operators is turning to the CBD and hemp markets?
Yeah, so we actually recently acquired a company called Pure Ratios out of California that is really involved on the CBD side of things. And I think that is a really fascinating growth market. There's plenty of snake oil salesmen out there since it is such a big craze, but I think there is actually something there. And so we are working with them in order to bring their products further to market. All of theirs are either CBD only or some with THC, so it is a mix. They are licensed and selling them in dispensaries in California. And so I don't think CBD is going away. I think the tone of the conversation will definitely change over the next few years. Hopefully people will stop having CBD gummies in gas stations. Don't trust those products, but I think that as long as the people don't sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater there thinking, oh, it's all a scam because some of these companies are scams, I think that there really will be a place for CBD in the long term.
Jason?
And we also acquired a CBD business earlier this year called CBD for Life. It's more of a beauty products and topicals, creams, less so than ingestible products. But we think it's a really great business, very high growth, a lot of market opportunity. It's highly competitive, as Sam alluded to, but it gives the opportunity to test out and build products and brands that can be sold nationally, can be sold in national retailers. Our products are being carried in large national players. So that opportunity, I think, is a big one. It's a competitive one. I don't think it's going to shift our full business model. It's going to be a smaller piece of the overall pie, but it's an important one to be a player in.
Well, Gronk's take it, so maybe you'll get Brady. One of you guys will sign him up.
Exactly.
Katrina, are you seeing it's easier or opening up on the banking side of the CBD and hemp?
No, for us, it's easier to bank cannabis than it is to bank hemp because we actually have guidelines. And until the USDA and the states or Native American tribes roll out their plans, we don't have any clear guidance. So we are doing a small pilot program on it right now, but it's hard for us to monitor if people are selling, especially on online platforms, to states where CBD may be illegal. Where are they getting the monies they're depositing with us? Is it from compliant hemp or non-compliant hemp? And so we're waiting and wading into it slowly until we get some certainty with the laws.
Well, I want to leave some time for questions, but I just want to make sure we talk about where this panel sees the next big opportunities. I mean, you've got New York, New Jersey, Florida, Michigan's online, Illinois is coming online. Where are you really starting to focus your attention, or is it on your core business?
So I think a lot of our, we're always looking at all opportunities, but we're highly focused on our core business. We're in a bunch of the markets that you just mentioned, so we think the opportunity will be great in states like New York and New Jersey. once the regulations are put in place for adult use. So those are markets where we're focused to ensure that we'll be ready to handle that demand when it's available. Florida is another great opportunity. Even on the medical side alone, there's a lot of patient growth and a lot of demand there, but that'll be one of the biggest markets in the country once it comes online. I think a lot of the states you mentioned are important ones, some of which we, iAnthus specifically, are not in, but the opportunities in Illinois, Michigan, we think will be great ones for those that are there. And of course, if there are opportunities to enter that state, we'd seek to do that, especially to be in some of the major cities where it helps develop a brand where there are kind of influencer markets.
Yeah, I think certainly the tri-state area is going to be a huge market. Illinois and Michigan are, large populations, and some have the highest per capita consumptions. But you put the map up internationally in the beginning. In the next 5 to 10 years, I think international is just going to explode. So many countries brought in drug laws at our insistence, the U.S. foreign policy. And as that evaporates, I think you're going to see a lot more monetization around the world of cannabis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for us, the states that are currently going through that transition from medical to adult use are really high priorities. We're in the medical industry in both Illinois and Michigan, and so making that transition for us is one of our top issues right now. I do think, as Greg mentioned, the Northeast is going to be one of the biggest areas coming soon. I'm from Connecticut, so that's always, I'm trying to get them to come along, but I think I hope we beat New York and all the other states, but as soon as more dominoes start falling, it's all going to happen, I think. Pennsylvania, they still have Republican control of the legislature, so I think they'll be trailing behind New York and New Jersey and Connecticut, but I think they'll come along pretty soon as well. So those are our biggest focuses, but one thing too that I think hasn't gotten too much attention yet, but Mississippi is going to be voting on a medical legalization initiative next November, and that's just one that hasn't been getting too much attention yet because down south you think that the progress is going to take a lot longer, but I think they have a really, really good shot at winning. I think that as long as they make it onto the ballot and get certified and everything, that it will pass, just because support for medical is so high now that even in Mississippi it's probably, I think it's 60 or 65%. And I think that will be a really interesting business opportunity because you kind of see this general trend that the blue states are the ones that legalize a lot faster because they're more on board with it, but they also have the tightest business regulations. And then it takes a lot longer for red states to come along, but once they do it, they're just like, hey, you're a business. We like businesses, do your thing. Like, look at Oklahoma. And so I think Mississippi is going to look a lot closer to Oklahoma than Massachusetts, which is good in certain ways, tougher in others, but that will be, I think, a really huge opportunity for anyone looking at the national stage.
Great, thank you. I would like to open it up to a few questions. We have a few minutes. I recognize we started late to get people the opportunity to get here because of the weather, but I assume we have a microphone out there somewhere, and I just open it up to the floor. So first come, first serve. Any questions for any of the panelists? Okay.
So just have a question. I know you've mentioned you made some investments in the CBD space, and at the same time has brought up, the snake oil salesman out there. Does the CBD industry have a self-policing, a self-regulation, or the government put regulations on CBD? Because the concern is like, it has great potential, but there's all these other people getting into it and kind of polluting it, and the nut regulations aren't there. At the same time, the flip side of that is the vape issue, which none of us really, we don't know what the cause of it is yet. And the government is taking such a strong hand there, but in the CBD area, they're not taking, I haven't seen any involvement, maybe there is, I'm just not familiar with it, but just wanted to hear your take on that. In terms of, here's CBD with all these bad players in it and no regulation, versus the other side of the extreme of the vape is full regulation, and how that all gets tainted into the marketplace, both of those things, because if it doesn't get, if the CBD is allowed to run free and run wild, at some point there's going to be something bad put into a CBD by some rogue player, and how do you stop that from happening? so that you don't face a crisis in that arena as well.
Yeah, I mean, on that front, I think it's really important to just have patient education that, hey, CBD federally is not regulated. If you're buying something in a frog-shaped gummy at the gas station, don't trust that. There's no real labels on it. You don't know what's in it. But if you're purchasing from a state-regulated medical dispensary, you can get real CBD products there. It's difficult because, of course, then you need a patient card to access those facilities, but it's actually tested, it's regulated, you know that there aren't any of the banned pesticides or other chemicals in there, you know the actual potency. And so I think steering patients towards purchasing their CBD from state-regulated facilities is the way to go, just because that's the only way you can have any sort of certainty. As far as the connection to the vaping issue, I hadn't actually looked into the overlap too much, so I don't know if a lot of these, I mean the issue on the vaping side seems to be primarily black market vaporizer cartridges. Many of those probably do have some CBD in them. I don't know if there's any CBD only ones that are having this sort of issue, but I wouldn't be surprised. So again, steering people towards the state regulated system while there's still no federal regulations. At least most states do have good testing and potency and labeling requirements. Massachusetts among them. There's some that are looser or in the process of doing implementing testing, but I think those are very sensible regulations that we should have both for public safety and for patients.
But to add one thing to this, Jim, CBD from hemp is theoretically regulated. It's regulated by the FDA. And the FDA has come out with their policy saying that if it's in food, if it's in pet products, beverage, et cetera, it's illegal. They still consider CBD illegal. If it's in topical and you're not making any health claims, they're turning the other way. But they have issued cease and desist orders, and 2 operators over the years. The problem is they don't have the enforcement resources. They have stepped up a little. Curaleaf did get a cease and desist. Charlotte's Web has been getting cease and desist orders for years now, and they just continue to ignore them. So it's really a question of enforcement. And the goal is to have regulations put in place by the FDA. They keep saying within weeks, within months, and then the states will put in regulations on the sale. I mean, technically in Massachusetts, you can't sell the CBD products. From hemp, you can develop them, but you can't sell them. It's a crazy law. But if you do go into your mobile station, you'll see the gummy bears sitting right there on the cash register. So as I said, technically, yes, there are policing regulations, but nobody's following them. We have time for one more question. Yes.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks again for the good panel. To that issue with CBD, a little over a month ago, Mitch McConnell, to his good nature, sent a letter to the FDA requiring that within 6 weeks they make some kind of determination about CBD, but not really putting in any kind of enforcement principles to that requirement. So is it possible to shed a little bit of light on what may or may not happen over the next week or two, or if that was just a pipe dream? Yeah.
I'm happy to take this one. The FDA is moving at a breakneck pace to try to figure something about CBD. Normally they're on years and years time frame. They had this big hearing back in May and had public comments and extended them to July. They were supposed to come out with a report. They're trying to find some middle ground here, but they've already approved Epidiolex, which is cannabis-derived CBD. So they're in a tough spot here that they can't easily back out of. And I don't think anything the Senate is going to do is going to speed up what is already the quickest I've ever seen the FDA move on anything. And I used to do drug patent work before I ever got into cannabis. So they're going quick for them, but it ain't going to happen anytime soon, in my opinion. If we get some kind of guidance by the end of the year, that would be great. And that guidance would mostly be saying, we got to look at this more, is my guess.
Thank you. I could keep you guys up here for a lot longer, and there's so many questions I'm sure the audience would have as well. We've tried to dig into some of the major issues confronting the industry. This panel is at the forefront of it. We appreciate your time and your insights. Our panelists will be around if there's follow-up questions. As I said, this is all about collaboration and connectivity, so we encourage you to talk to them. And I want to thank you for your time and your great insight. And we're going to move to the next panel, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.